Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Sacramento County Sheriff's Department Sergeant Sean Hampton, Sheriff's spokesperson. The purpose of today's press conference is to provide additional information and an investigative update regarding the investigation into the murder of Deputy Robert French and the shooting of 2 California Highway Patrol officers. During this press conference, Sheriff Jones will speak, as well as Homicide Detective Sergeant Paul Belli. They will provide additional information and an investigative update. Please hold your questions until after the press conference. There will be a brief question and answer session. And with that, I will turn it over to Sheriff Scott Jones.
Good morning and thank you all for coming. I'd first like to start out by some thank yous. I first want to thank the community, which has been outstanding as always. We never want to ask for their support, but when we need it, they're always there. I also want to thank everybody in law enforcement that has reached out to me personally or our department directly or indirectly and offered not only condolences but whatever assistance we might need throughout this process. I also want to thank the media for their continued coverage. I wanted to convey a thank you on behalf of the family of Deputy French for the media coverage as well, and then an additional request that when they are ready, they will talk to the media. They are still not ready to talk to the media. So if you would respect that, I'd appreciate it. Because the suspect in this case has died, there will be no prosecution, at least of him, and so there won't be details that roll out over time. So I wanted to provide this opportunity today to try and go through the very dynamic scene and occurrences on the day that this all transpired, to give everybody at least a fuller picture of what happened. And again, after I speak, I'll be turning it over to Detective Belli, who will be able to answer any more specific questions you might have, and we will leave time for questions at the end. Originally, it's a little closer so I can still hear the mics. What we have here is the location of the hotel. This is Auburn Boulevard. This is Fulton Avenue over here just off the map. The officers were attempting to serve, they were attempting to do a probation search on a subject in this room. This hotel has an internal hallway. This is the front. The back looks about the same. He was in this first room on the second floor. This outcropping here were the rooms with balconies. He was in the first room with the balcony on the second floor. From this internal hallway, the officers, the detectives, the CHP detectives, and the officers that were present knocked and tried to get in the room. They were almost immediately met with gunfire through the door and through the entirety of the front door, the front wall of the hotel room. It was during this encounter that 2 California Highway Patrol officers got shot. The 2 injured officers and one of the escorting deputy sheriffs were taken out at the end of this building, taken around the perimeter, taken out here. The one officer was driven by a Sacramento County deputy to the hospital. The other injured CHP officer stayed in place until the event was largely over and could be extracted by medical personnel. At that time, we had an officer in the back. There's a driveway, it's not seen, but this driveway that starts here and ends here. We had an officer on a perimeter position in the back. This is when the subject went from the front door, shooting out the front door, went to the balcony. Saw this officer, and there was an exchange of gunfire between the officer on the ground and the subject in the second floor balcony. Ultimately, the subject jumped down off the second floor balcony, ran down the back of the building, and came around to this side after the officer had been extracted and took up a position behind this planter. And shortly before that, as other officers were responding to the chaos that had occurred, several officers came in this entrance. It was the only accessible entrance off Auburn Boulevard. There is a gate here that was open later that day, but it was not open during this encounter. There's a fence along the entire side and a closed chain link fence along the east side of the property. One of those responding officers was Deputy Bob French, whose car stopped right about here on the outside where this tree is located right here. Very shortly after arriving, it was about the time he was here at this planter, and he started engaging in the third of his firefights from this planter to Bob, Deputy French, and some of the other officers that were back here. He ultimately made his way to where his car was parked, right here, and again engaged officers in gunfire. It looks as though the suspect fired 34 rounds from his assault rifle and over a dozen rounds from a 9mm handgun that he also had. It was during this exchange of gunfire between the suspect near his car and Deputy French where one of the bullets going through the back of the vehicle, mortally wounding Deputy French. The piece of the bullet that made it through the car, Deputy French was wearing a bulletproof vest. It entered into his shoulder and went through soft tissue, went through his heart, which ultimately killed him. Even though it was a fatal round, Deputy French, exhibiting extraordinary and conspicuous bravery in the line of duty, still continued to engage the suspect, keeping him pinned down and allowing other officers to maintain positions of safety and cover. Ultimately, the subject got in the car and came around here to this area where he was engaged by officers and ultimately went past here and out this driveway. As he was passing by, he was shot at by several officers in positions here and by Deputy French, who was able to get off rounds even though he was mortally wounded. In fact, there is a possibility, the autopsy will be later today, but there is a possibility that the round that ultimately caused the suspect's demise was fired by Deputy French. The subject went out here and then continued on the pursuit. For that, I'll invite Deputy Belli up to continue the story there, but obviously I'll stick around for questions. I just want to point out again, in case I went by it too quickly, the fact that Deputy French was mortally wounded and continued to fight in a firefight, never retreating and never stopping to protect the officer that was with him and the other officers that could not see what was happening. Even though he was mortally wounded, he continued to engage and pin down the suspect as best he could, and only showed signs of his injury once this scene was stabilized and the person was out in the pursuit. More than we ever could have asked of any officer, and he did so conspicuously and bravely. With that, I'll turn it over to Detective Belli, who can fill in some of the details about the ensuing pursuit and maybe some of the details regarding the shootings. Deputy Belli.
Okay, so
Can you please say your first and last name and spell it out for us?
sure, it's Paul, P-A-U-L. Last name is Belli, B-E-L-L-I, and I'm a sergeant with the Sacramento Sheriff's Homicide Bureau.
Thank you.
That's not going to work. Do we have the other item? So as the sheriff explained, the sequence of events that occurred that day. Perfect, thank you. This is basically a scene sketch related to also what occurred, and provides a little bit different perspective, whereas this would be the back of the building here, and beginning with, number one is the original gunfight that occurred within the hallway. Number two is where the suspect, firing from the balcony, engaged the officer that was covering the back entrance of the hotel. He then moves around and takes those positions there. This is a representative of Deputy Bob French's vehicle at the time. Deputy French and a CHP detective were here using the vehicle as cover, attempting to acquire the suspect during the gunfight, all while taking gunfire from the suspect. At a point within the gunfight, the suspect enters a stolen vehicle and then drives essentially right past Deputy French, the detective, and several officers out onto Fulton Avenue and continues southbound on Fulton Avenue, where officers that were arriving began pursuing him. He went southbound Fulton to Marconi, eastbound. At the Marconi and Watt intersection, he continued southbound Watt. All while traffic was yielding, officers were continuing their pursuit, and he ultimately comes to El Camino and Watt. So he is southbound Watt Avenue. He gets stopped from making a turn onto eastbound El Camino by vehicular traffic. At this point, one of the deputies in the pursuit exited his vehicle and observed the suspect with the rifle moving towards him, and he ended up engaging the suspect there with handgun fire. Suspect ultimately jumped the curb to get away and continued up El Camino to essentially what is El Camino High School. You can see within the pursuit, suspect is clearly not driving in the same fashion as he had been in the original portion of the pursuit. So his medical condition was worsening at that point. And then he strikes a center median and then ultimately a telephone pole, which stops his progress. At that point, officers essentially set up a perimeter and were able to take him into custody and then provide medical aid for him at the hospital. So that is essentially the event in its entirety. If we have additional questions.
So you had a report that he died of self-inflicted gunshot. Is that not clear at this point then, or what's the status on the suspect, what ultimately killed him?
The suspect absolutely did not die of a self-inflicted gunshot wound. His every intent was to get away and was willing to kill officers to do so. So it was never his intent to end his life, at least I can only speculate, with his own hand.
And can you walk us through a little bit of the background on this as far as, and I guess after the fact, you guys were there initially on a car theft investigation. Was this a part of a larger car theft ring? Were these three individuals just involved alone? What happened? What's the background on that part of things?
You want to answer what you can?
Sure. So essentially they were there following up on a auto theft that had occurred earlier that morning. So we have two deputies that are assigned to, detectives that are assigned to a SACCATS task force, which is CHP and our officers related to auto theft only. That morning, they had gone to the Ramada based upon some information about a stolen BMW. They located that BMW, and when they attempted to stop it, that vehicle ended up fleeing from the scene. That pursuit went into Elk Grove, where they were able to safely stop the pursuit. They took both subjects into custody, and then went back to the Ramada to continue their investigation to determine information related to car theft ring or other illegal activity that may have been occurring there. The driver of that vehicle was a registered guest at the hotel, which is the room that they went to attempt the probation search based on her search and seizure status.
But can you go into, like, was this part of a longer-term investigation? Was it part of a larger ring? Were these guys just freelancing?
It was not part of a larger ring, and it wasn't a long-term investigation as such.
Do you know what types of illegal activity, Sergeant, were going on in that room?
As it sits right now, we know obviously there's a stolen vehicle component to it. We know that there are firearms that are illegally possessed by the individuals within that room, and narcotics as well.
Just to take me back a little bit, I know the BMW was stolen. Was that the same car that led your deputies on a chase to Elk Grove?
Yes, the BMW was actually a pursuit that was conducted by the California Highway Patrol and several of our detectives. That's what led them back to Ramada to do the probation search. That's a separate vehicle from what he was using at the time.
And Deputy French was not there initially. He rolled up as part of the response. Is that what I understood you saying?
That's correct.
Correct.
This vehicle that he got away with, where ultimately the crash happened, was this another stolen vehicle right then and there, or is it something in the past that was already stolen? Did he steal it that day, that instant, or was it something, a vehicle that had already been stolen in the past?
It was previously stolen from Avis Rent-A-Car out of the Bay Area.
I'm sorry, which vehicle was previously stolen?
The Dodge
Challenger.
Challenger.
That he tried to make his escape.
As well as the BMW.
Correct.
That led to.
Correct.
The weapon used, was it stolen?
The weapons, we are still conducting a trace on those. That'll require DOJ's assistance along with ATF. As it sits right now, they do not show as a record on file.
Were those two vehicles the only stolen cars involved that day, or with those people?
Those were the only two that we recovered on that day.
And as far as what was going on in the hotel room, he was there, she was registered, any sense of just sort of like a base, a hide, any idea what had been going on there, how long they'd been there?
They'd been there for several days, but I don't know about a base or a hideout. It's just a cheaper hotel within Sacramento County.
What was found in the hotel once law enforcement was able to go in?
We found firearms, we found narcotics, and essentially indicia related to the subjects that were in that room.
Say what kind of narcotics?
It was methamphetamine.
Yeah. Any idea amount at this point?
Not yet.
Going back to Elk Grove, the accident, there was supposedly the girlfriend that was arrested, taken into custody, and still is in custody, if I'm not mistaken, and another passenger. She was interrogated or asked questions, and then you guys let her go, I believe. She had nothing to do with it. She was nothing, this case or anything like that.
So prior to this event occurring, that passenger had been detained, and we ended up speaking with her in relation to this event. At that time, we have let her go, being just a passenger in a stolen vehicle, and the information that she provided. We are continuing our investigation moving forward as we continue.
And you actually mentioned the driver being a girlfriend of the suspect, deceased suspect. Is that accurate? Do you know the relationship?
She is the one who indicated that to us.
The suspect, one of the suspects who's in custody right now.
Correct, the
Okay.
driver of the stolen BMW.
And I have a follow-up question to that. Given that the primary suspect who shot and killed Deputy French is now dead, will she be charged as an accessory in this murder and have extra charges tacked on to what she could already be charged with?
Charging decisions are all done by the district attorney's office. We develop the case and provide them with all the information to make whatever decisions that they will make.
But I mean, I think I can answer your question generally. I mean, I don't think at this time there would really be enough to charge her with the murder or charges related to the murder. But obviously the investigation will continue. So if information is developed in that she assisted in some material way, then certainly that decision could change. But as we sit here today, there's no intent to charge her with any of those crimes, if that responds to your question.
As far as you mentioned, this is not part of the long-term carbon in this one, but had they had that history before, the three involved, or was it two?
There is a history between the driver of the BMW and the suspect, Daniel Littlecloud, with a variety of types of criminal activity, including car theft, illegal firearms possession.
Yeah, I mean, as has been reported in the media already, he has a pretty lengthy criminal history, not just in the state courts, but in the federal courts as well. We are in the process of researching that, and I may make a comment on that later. But he was in federal custody a year ago and was ordered released by the judge in that case as not a risk. So I certainly will be following up on that as we go forward.
Any idea how long the two of them have been together, romantically involved, or otherwise?
Not at this time.
Like, more than days, though? I mean, you said it went back a ways. Any idea?
It's more than
Months,
days.
years?
It's more than days. She didn't indicate exactly how long.
There were some other people detained that day, seen in handcuffs, leaving in handcuffs from the hotel. Does the investigation include any other people that might have been involved with some of their activities?
As we sit right now, it does not appear that those individuals that were detained that day are related to Daniel Littlecloud and the two in the BMW. They had some of their own issues that were occurring there at the hotel, and those will be dealt with completely separately. They don't appear to be associates or involved.
One more question?
Thank you. I'm hearing from some people in the law enforcement community that this guy, when he was released, he made it very publicly known that he will not go back to jail or go back to prison. He'll do whatever he can to stay out. Is there any indication right now that shows that, he was out to kill because he didn't want to go back?
Not that we have right now. I mean, obviously, that might be, that information could be developed. I mean, he clearly was not intending to go back to jail, and he will not be going back to jail. But we don't have any information as far as statements that he's made to that effect previously or since.
Sheriff Jones, have you been in touch with the family of Mr. French?
Of course, we've been in touch with the family very shortly after and continuously since,
How are they doing?
as you would expect.
How are you and the people in your department holding up through this?
I appreciate the question. It's difficult for us. You know, unfortunately, we're a very large agency. We're the largest agency in Northern California. And that, one of the downsides of that is we're no stranger to this. I guess the good news is we know by history that we will get through it. And we'll get through it together with the community and the rest of our law enforcement family, both internally and externally. But it doesn't make it any easier to go through it since last week, and certainly through the memorial. And you know, once that is at least in our rearview mirror, as far as having occurred, then we'll start the healing process. We'll never quite get over it, as you can see. We have a lot of folks who have given their ultimate sacrifice with valor to this profession, in this department, in this community, and he'll be another such plaque up here. So it never gets any easier, but we honor our own, and we heal as a community.
Plans yet to add Deputy French's name here set?
Of course.
And on the assault weapon, can you describe that a little bit more?
From what I understand, it was a foreign-made AK-47 type weapon.
So basically a knockoff?
Yeah, I think that's accurate.
And number of rounds or number of extended clips or anything like that?
He had two, basically two magazines that were taped together, and one was empty, one was inserted into the firearm at the time of his being taken into custody. Approximately 34 rifle rounds were fired by the suspect at the scene.
So 30-round magazines?
They were, and 9mm rounds as well.
He had a 9mm handgun in the vehicle with him, and there was another 9mm handgun found in the hotel room. And there might be additional weapons as we go through it.
So was Deputy Robert French inside of his car when he got shot
No.
in the shoulder, or was he covering?
He was taking a position of cover behind his vehicle, and there were a lot of rounds that struck his vehicle. And unfortunately, the round that mortally wounded him went through the vehicle. At least a piece of the bullet then went through his shoulder, missing his vest, and only hitting soft tissue all the way through, which is why it was allowed to progress unimpeded into his body, that ultimately went to his heart.
Did he have a partner in the car at the time?
He did not have a partner in the car, but there was a highway patrol detective with him. At the time, they were both taking cover behind that vehicle. And that officer was not injured at that time.
So he was wounded, he was down, and still kept shooting at the suspect.
That's correct.
Which could have, morally.
I can tell you that I've seen the video of the event. Obviously, the video doesn't end well, but I can tell you that there would have been no indication that he was hit at all, other than a comment he made to his partner officer quite a while before he actually stopped shooting, before the suspect left the driveway, and that became a place of at least stasis enough for that scene was secure. It was then that he actually exhibited signs of the significant injury that he had obtained. Before that, you would not have been able to tell he was injured.
Are you guys releasing the video?
We don't have any plans to release the video. All right, thank you all very much. I appreciate your coverage of this, and I appreciate your sensitivity to the subject matter, and I appreciate you all as community members. You guys lost somebody in the community as well, and I appreciate that as well. So thank you very much.